The fog over Berlin in the spring of 1945 seemed to cling to everything it touched, as if the city itself were trying to veil the last fragments of its own collapse. Rubble choked the streets, buildings stood ripped open like carcasses, and the once rigid machinery of the Reich sputtered toward its inevitable end. Amid this dying labyrinth moved General Alaric von Wellmann, a man whose presence had once commanded entire fronts, but who now appeared almost ghost-like among the ruins he had helped to create. Those who encountered him in those final weeks described a figure worn down to the bone, an officer whose immaculate uniform had given way to mud, ash, and sleeplessness, whose eyes had sunk into a hollowness that looked less like exhaustion and more like a man already drifting toward disappearance. He walked with the precision of habit, yet each step seemed governed by an internal urgency, as though he carried a secret heavy enough to bend even the last shreds of his discipline. Berlin was collapsing around him, but something deeper and more private was collapsing within him. Rumors inside the bunker networks claimed that von Wellmann had been entrusted with documents so sensitive that even high-ranking officers spoke of them in half-whispers. Some said he carried intelligence that could have altered the final negotiations of the war. Others insisted he possessed evidence of betrayals inside the Reich's highest circle, secrets worth killing for even as the regime burned. He moved through the night with a small satchel strapped beneath his coat, always keeping one hand near it as though expecting someone to snatch it away. A few soldiers recalled seeing him near Tiergarten, speaking to no one, staring at a map that shook in his trembling hands. Another claimed he had been seen burning papers behind a bombed-out cafe before vanishing into a network of service tunnels. These fragments created an image not of a commanding general, but of a man hunted by forces visible and invisible, a man trying to outrun something closing in from every direction. By late April, Berlin was no longer a city, but a series of desperate shelters, strung together by narrow corridors of survival. The tavern on Eisenstrasse, still partially standing despite several direct hits, became a place where soldiers, civilians, and ghosts alike lingered among the debris. Its basement, damp and flickering with unreliable lantern light, served as a temporary refuge for those passing through. It was here that the last confirmed sighting of General von Wellmann occurred. The few witnesses who later spoke described the same unsettling details. He arrived shortly before midnight, face streaked with grime, uniform torn at the shoulder, the satchel still clutched beneath his coat. He didn't ask for shelter or food. He asked only for a quiet corner, his voice hoarse and nearly broken. Even in the dim light, those present said his expression seemed fractured by something deeper than fear, as if he carried not just the burdens of defeat, but the knowledge of a fate already sealed. He sat alone at a table near the farthest wall, the head bowed over something small and metallic in his hands. One soldier thought it was his identification tag, turning slowly between his fingers as though he were weighing the significance of his own name. Another swore he glimpsed a second object, wrapped in cloth, perhaps a key or fragment of something larger. Yet none dared approach him. The air around him felt strangely heavy, as though his presence carried a warning. After nearly an hour of stillness, he stood abruptly, leaving the table without a word, and descended into the lower storage tunnels beneath the tavern. A civilian attempted to follow, thinking the general might need assistance, but returned moments later with a pale face and shaking hands, saying the tunnels were darker and deeper than he remembered, as if they had swallowed more than just the fleeing officer. As the night outside cracked with artillery, those inside the tavern waited for von Wellmann to return. He never did. When morning arrived, the entrance to the lower tunnels had partially collapsed, and no one saw fit to clear them. Berlin had more pressing graves to uncover. For decades after the war, the general's disappearance became just another shadow in the vast landscape of vanished men. But his name lingered more stubbornly than most. Some survivors insisted he had been carrying something the Allies would have paid greatly to obtain. Others believed he had tried to defect in those last hours, seeking absolution or bargaining for his life. There were even whispers that he had been executed by his own men, a silent purge carried out in the final paranoid hours of the Reich. Yet no body surfaced, no documents emerged, and no eyewitness testimony had enough certainty to close the case. The general had simply dissolved into the ruins. And as we drift deeper into this mystery, let me know something that connects us across time and distance. From where are you watching this video? Your answer may reveal more than you expect about how these forgotten histories find their way back into the present, threading through the very people who search for meaning in them. The war may have ended decades ago, but its echoes still pull at us, guiding us towards stories that refuse to remain buried. In the years following the German surrender, Eisenstrasse rebuilt itself over layers of unspoken memories. The tavern, renovated and expanded, became a lively gathering place with no visible indication that a high-ranking general had once vanished beneath its foundation. Generations passed through its doors, unaware that the stone floor beneath their feet concealed a silent chapter of history. Occasionally, a new owner or builder would discover oddities in the structure, a sealed doorway where no records showed one should exist, a cold draft rising from cracks in the basement floor, the persistent scent of earth, even in the dry months of summer. Once, during a renovation in the 1970s, workers reported hearing muffled metallic clinks echoing from beneath the floor. They dismissed it as settling pipes or loose tools, never realizing they had brushed against the remains of an unsolved disappearance. Even von Wehlmann's family refused to accept his vanishing. His widow, Elise, spent the first decade after the war submitting inquiry after inquiry, contacting former officers, tracing rumors across a divided Germany. She died without answers, leaving behind letters that hinted at secrets her husband had kept from even those closest to him. Some historians later argued that Elise's letters alluded to coded messages, suggesting von Wehlmann had been part of covert internal operations within the Reich. Others dismissed the letters as the grief-driven attempts of a widow trying to make sense of an unbearable silence. Whatever the truth, the decades that followed allowed speculation to grow like vines over the ruins of facts. Then, in 2013, during a reconstruction project beneath the tavern, workers unearthed something that had no business being there. At first it seemed like a fragment of rusted debris, just another relic of the war-scarred earth. But when brushed clean, the object revealed a familiar oval shape, its edges worn but intact. Stamped on its face was a name that sent ripples through both academic circles and the public imagination: Alaric von Wehlmann, the ID tag he had worn until the night he disappeared. It was found buried deeper than any previous excavation had reached, lying in compacted soil rather than rubble or human remains. No bones surrounded it, no uniform fabric clung to the metal. It was as though the tag had been placed deliberately, hidden with intent, a signature left behind without the body it once identified. The discovery forced a re-examination of every theory that had attempted to explain his fate. Some argued the general must have died in the collapse of the tunnels, his body lost or crushed beyond retrieval. Others countered that the absence of remains suggested an entirely different scenario. If the tag had been removed before his death, then why? And by whom? Was it a symbolic gesture from the general himself, abandoning the identity of the man he had once been? Or had someone else removed it, using his disappearance as part of a larger, unseen narrative? Investigators noted the soil around the tag appeared undisturbed for decades, packed tightly as though the object had been placed there before the building above had fully settled into its present structure. This raised the unsettling possibility that von Wellmann had entered the tunnels alive, left the tag behind intentionally, and continued deeper into the earth, never to resurface. Others explored darker possibilities, that he had been taken, not lost, that the tunnels beneath Berlin, known for their sprawling complexity, might have served as pathways for clandestine operations, even in the final hours of the Reich. If von Wellmann had been carrying sensitive documents or intelligence, it would not have been unprecedented for covert factions to eliminate him quietly, burying the evidence with him. In that scenario, the tag could have been discarded as a misdirection, a breadcrumb meant to suggest a simpler ending. But nothing about the tag's placement felt simple. Its location hinted at deliberacy, as though meant to be found, but not too soon. The resurfacing of the ID tag reignited interest in von Wellmann's final movements, drawing historians, amateur investigators, and former intelligence analysts into renewed debate. Those who had once dismissed his disappearance as another casualty of chaos now found themselves confronted with a meticulously preserved artifact that refused to provide clarity. Every clue pointed toward the same conclusion. The general's final hours had been orchestrated, either by him or by forces that understood his importance. Yet the deeper investigators looked, the more the timeline frayed. Records from the last days of the war contained gaps that seemed deliberate. Pages missing from logs, names redacted or erased. One archivist described the surviving documents as having dark fingerprints stamped across their margins, not from physical hands, but from the invisible pressures of those who had tried to reshape the story. In the present day, standing beneath the tavern's floor, visitors report an unusual stillness, as though the air itself carries a memory of the general's presence. The lanterns flicker without reason, dust swirls in slow, unnatural patterns, and some claim to hear faint echoes drifting from deeper within the sealed tunnels. Whether it is mere imagination or something more, the atmosphere remains heavy with unanswered questions. And just as the shadows once swallowed von Wellmann without a trace, so too do they seem to guard the secrets he carried. The mystery endures, drawing us further into its depths. And before we continue unraveling it, this is the moment where you can keep this investigation alive in the dark. If stories like this one echo through you the way lost voices echoed through the tunnels beneath Berlin, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us descend even deeper into the forgotten corridors where truth waits beneath layers of dust and silence. The discovery of the ID tag beneath the Berlin tavern ignited a chain reaction that no one had anticipated. It began quietly, with a construction worker named Jonas Keller, whose shovel struck metal in the dim glow of a work lamp. At first he thought it was another shell fragment, one of the countless remnants still scattered beneath the city. But as he brushed away the packed soil, the engraved letters began to emerge, each one sharp despite the rust that clung to them like dried blood. The names seemed to vibrate in the air. Alaric von Wellmann, and though Keller had no idea who that was at the time, something in the room shifted. The air grew colder, and even the hum of nearby machinery seemed to recede into silence. He slipped the tag into his pocket, unaware that by doing so, he had reopened a wound the city itself had long tried to seal. News of the find spread with the quiet insistence of something fated. Within days, journalists arrived, followed by historians, then men in suits who never identified themselves but carried badges that opened every door. They asked questions about the precise location, about the soil composition, about who had handled the object, and when. The construction site was quickly sealed off under the pretext of safety concerns, but those who had been there on that first night whispered of other motives. Keller himself vanished from public view soon after. His neighbors said he moved away to the countryside. Others insisted he had been relocated by authorities who wanted to keep him from speaking further. What remained undeniable was the growing sense that the past had not merely resurfaced. It was calling back something or someone from the darkness. In the months that followed, the ID tag underwent extensive analysis. Forensic experts confirmed it was authentic, stamped in the same manner as those used by the Wehrmacht during the final years of the war. Microscopic examination revealed traces of organic residue embedded within the crevices, though no one could determine exactly what it was. Some speculated it was soil from a deeper layer of the Berlin substrata, one that hadn't been disturbed since the city's reconstruction. Others suggested it might be residue from decayed fabric or human remains, though no DNA could be extracted. The metal itself, though corroded, bore a faint oily sheen, unusual for an artifact buried for nearly 70 years. One laboratory report, later leaked to a fringe publication, mentioned the presence of an unidentified compound on the surface. It was odorless, colorless, and resistant to chemical breakdown. When questioned, the laboratory declined to comment. For the historians, the tag was both a key and a curse. It reignited an obsession with General von Wehlmann's final days, drawing attention to the web of inconsistencies surrounding his disappearance. Old war records, long ignored, were pulled from archives in Berlin, Munich, and London. Declassified documents revealed the general's name in unexpected places. Cipher transmissions, coded memos, intercepted communications between German officers and unknown intermediaries. One entry, dated April 28, 1945, mentioned an Operation Nadir, described only as a contingency for post-collapse continuation. The name von Wehlmann appeared beside it, along with the cryptic annotation, "To be preserved. Directive executed." No one had ever uncovered evidence of such an operation before. Its implications were chilling. What exactly had the general been preserving, and for whom? The deeper researchers dug, the stranger the trail became. Witness accounts from that chaotic final week began to resurface. Statements from surviving soldiers who had never spoken publicly before. One claimed to have seen von Wehlmann in the company of two civilians near Anhalter Bahnhof, both wearing dark coats and speaking in what he described as a strange dialect. Another insisted the general had boarded a truck headed west, guarded by armed men who refused to identify their unit. Yet another said he saw the general's distinctive uniform among a group of corpses later burned in a mass grave near the river Spree. Each story contradicted the next, and yet all shared one common detail. Von Wehlmann had seemed calm, resigned even, as though he were walking not toward death, but toward a destination he already understood. By late 2013, the investigation had taken on an almost supernatural undertone. The tavern above the site, now a modern bar frequented by students and tourists, became a pilgrimage point for the curious. Patrons began reporting unsettling experiences: a sudden drop in temperature, glasses trembling on their shelves, lights flickering without cause. One night, the bar's security cameras captured something that froze the staff in collective silence. Around 3:17 a.m., when the place was empty, a shadow appeared on the footage. Tall, indistinct, moving with the stiff precision of a soldier on patrol. It paused near the spot where the ID tag had been found, then seemed to dissolve into the wall. Technicians reviewed the footage repeatedly, finding no sign of tampering. The owner deleted it the next morning, claiming he didn't want his establishment to become a ghost attraction. But fragments of the recording leaked online within weeks, fueling conspiracy channels and reigniting theories of the general's spectral return. Meanwhile, one historian, Dr. Annika Brandt of the Humboldt University, had become the reluctant center of this growing storm. She had spent years studying the internal fractures of the Nazi high command and was among the first to connect von Wellmann to Operation Nadir. Through meticulous cross-referencing of forgotten archives, she found patterns in troop redeployments that suggested a covert evacuation effort during the final collapse. A handful of officers, all marked with the same code symbol, had disappeared under similar circumstances. Their records ended abruptly, often with blank pages where the date of death should have been. Brandt proposed that these men were part of a final mission, one designed to ensure the survival of certain ideological or scientific assets beyond the war's official end. When asked what she believed had become of them, she gave a single, chilling answer. They went underground, literally. Her words resonated far beyond academia. The phrase "went underground" began to circulate through forums, podcasts, and documentaries. Speculation ranged from hidden Nazi networks beneath Berlin to clandestine post-war relocations orchestrated by foreign intelligence. But one theory stood apart: the belief that von Wellmann himself had orchestrated his disappearance as part of an experiment, a ritual even, intended to ensure the endurance of knowledge forbidden by both conqueror and conquered. The ID tag, in this interpretation, was a marker, left behind intentionally, a signal to those who would come after. Some fringe historians began drawing connections between his last known positions and reports of secret laboratories hidden in the old U-Bahn tunnels, where scientists had supposedly conducted research on human endurance, psychological conditioning, and what one document euphemistically referred to as transference. Brandt, though skeptical of occult explanations, admitted one thing she could not deny. The general's movements formed a pattern that mirrored certain ritualistic geometries, triangular pathways connecting specific bombed locations across the city. Each site corresponded to a location tied to communication or command infrastructure. It was as if von Wellmann had been mapping something invisible, following lines of energy or intent buried beneath Berlin's surface. When asked if she believed the ID tag had been placed according to that same pattern, she simply nodded. "If you trace those coordinates," she said, "the tavern sits at the convergence point." As night deepened over Berlin, the story began to take on a life of its own. Online investigators combed through digital archives, some traveling to the tavern themselves, pressing their palms against the cold walls as though expecting to feel a pulse beneath the stone. A few claimed to hear whispers echoing faintly from the ground, in a language they could not identify. Most dismissed it as imagination, but one visitor recorded faint audio during a guided tour. When analyzed, the static seemed to form a fragmented voice repeating a single phrase, "Nicht vergessen." Don't forget. Experts ruled it interference, but for those who had followed von Wehlmann's story, it felt like a message, a reminder, perhaps even a warning. Through all of this, the city itself seemed to resist the truth, as though the earth beneath Berlin remembered more than anyone wanted to believe. The tavern's foundations, when scanned with ground-penetrating radar, revealed anomalies, hollow pockets, and linear voids extending farther than any mapped tunnel. One, in particular, stretched directly beneath the point where the tag had been unearthed, descending at an unnatural angle. The team responsible for the scan reported distorted readings, as if the instruments were reacting to magnetic interference, their data abruptly corrupted halfway through, rendering the file unreadable. They requested another opportunity to re-scan, but before they could, the property was purchased by a private entity with no listed owner. Within a week, the site was closed indefinitely for renovations, and so the mystery tightened again, as it always had, swallowing those who sought to expose it. Some say von Wehlmann's secret still sleeps beneath Berlin, coiled in the silence of sealed tunnels and forgotten rooms. Others believe his disappearance marked not an ending, but a transition, that he became something more than a name etched into metal, something woven into the city's bones, whispering through its echoes each time someone digs too deep. Whatever the truth, the story had once again achieved what perhaps he had intended all along: to survive. If this darkness still holds you as tightly as it holds me, remember, there are more corridors like this waiting to be explored. Subscribe now, and we'll keep walking together through the ruins where history refuses to rest, uncovering what should have stayed buried. By the time winter crept over Berlin in 2014, the story of Alaric von Wehlmann had grown far beyond a historical curiosity. It had become something alive, an organism of speculation, paranoia, and obsession that thrived in the gray space between truth and myth. The authorities' silence only deepened the hunger for answers. What began as a small archaeological curiosity had transformed into a full-scale enigma, with tendrils reaching through politics, academia, and the shadowed corners of intelligence networks. Every document withheld, every unexplained closure, became another pulse of proof for those convinced that something vast and deliberate still slumbered beneath the streets. Berliners began to whisper again, as they had 70 years before. Not about the war, but about what might still be hiding beneath its ashes. Dr. Annika Brandt, whose research had drawn her too deeply into the general's vanishing, was no longer merely a historian. She had become a vessel for the mystery itself. Her apartment on Unter den Linden filled with maps of pre-war Berlin, overlaid with translucent sheets marking the supposed paths of the underground tunnels. Newspaper clippings covered her walls like nervous tissue, a collage of names, dates, and half-legible military memos. Her colleagues began to worry. She had stopped teaching, stopped attending conferences. When asked about her withdrawal, she simply said that she had found something, a pattern that couldn't be coincidence. The more she studied it, the more the city itself seemed to react, as though Berlin were aware of her search and resented it. She started having the same dream, night after night. The tavern's basement, half lit, filled with a low humming vibration. In the dream, she followed the sound to a section of the wall that appeared ordinary, but seemed to breathe faintly, like the pulse of a living thing beneath the bricks. Each time she reached out to touch it, she woke in darkness, her ears ringing, her fingertips cold. She began keeping a recorder by her bed, capturing the sounds that sometimes followed her into waking. When played back, the recordings revealed faint rhythmic tones, almost mechanical, yet uneven, as if produced by something alive but struggling to imitate machinery. She brought these files to an acoustics expert, who identified frequencies too low for normal human speech. The expert's written analysis ended abruptly halfway through a page, followed by a note. "It's not an echo, it's an imprint." He never returned her calls again. Brandt's obsession soon attracted the attention of people outside academia. A man identifying himself only as Dieter contacted her through encrypted email, claiming to possess information about von Wellmann's final orders. He said he had once worked in property management for post-war reconstruction projects, and that certain underground areas were never meant to be reopened. When they finally met, in the dim corner of a bar not far from Eisenstrasse, he slid across a small envelope containing black and white photographs, grainy but unmistakably depicting soldiers hauling crates marked with the insignia of the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht into an unmarked tunnel. In one frame, slightly blurred, stood a man whose posture matched that of von Wellmann. "Those weren't evacuation supplies," Dieter whispered. "They were containment." He refused to elaborate and left before she could ask more. The next day, his email account was deleted, his phone disconnected, his apartment empty. Haunted by what she'd seen, Brandt decided to visit the tavern one final time, this time descending into the restricted basement under the pretense of conducting a cultural preservation survey. The air there was thick with dampness and old smoke. She traced her hand along the stone walls until she reached the section that, in her dream, had seemed to breathe. There, barely visible beneath a layer of dust, she noticed faint carvings, small, deliberate symbols etched into the mortar. Some resembled old alchemical marks for transformation and separation. Others appeared to be runic, but distorted, fused together like the merging of languages not meant to coexist. She photographed them all and returned to her apartment trembling, certain now that von Wellmann had been engaged in something far stranger than espionage or defection. 2 days later, the photographs disappeared from her computer. Every file, every backup, gone. Her email accounts locked, her research access revoked without explanation. When she contacted the university, they denied ever having employed her. Her publications were quietly removed from academic databases, her online presence scrubbed as though she had never existed. Friends she had known for years stopped responding to her messages, claiming not to recognize her number. It was as though the silence that had swallowed von Wellmann had begun consuming her as well. That same week, something strange happened at the tavern. The owner, a man named Marcus Weber, arrived one morning to find the basement door open despite having locked it the night before. Inside, he discovered footprints in the dust, bare, human, but unusually long, with heel impressions deeper than normal. The lights flickered as he descended, and for a moment, in the reflection of a puddle near the old tunnel entrance, he saw what looked like the outline of a figure standing behind him. When he turned, there was nothing. He left the basement, locked it, and put the building up for sale the following day. To this day, no buyer has been recorded in the public registry. Meanwhile, whispers spread among those still investigating the ID tag. Some claimed it had been relocated to a private research facility outside Munich, while others believed it had never left Berlin. A few said it was no longer metal at all, that something had changed in it after exposure to light. A museum archivist who briefly handled the artifact described a faint warmth emanating from it, as though the metal were alive. Another said it emitted a low-frequency hum when placed near other wartime relics, a sound that could only be heard through contact with the bone of the ear. Whatever its nature, the tag became an object of fear, passed from one hand to another until no one could confirm its true whereabouts. But the strangest evidence came not from researchers or witnesses, but from the city itself. A routine subway maintenance team reported finding a newly formed cavity beneath one of the disused tunnels connecting the old government quarter to Eisenstrasse. The cavity was lined with reinforced concrete, inconsistent with wartime architecture. When they attempted to enter, their instruments began to malfunction. Compasses spinning, lights dimming, comms cutting out. They recorded only 37 seconds of footage before abandoning the site. The footage, later leaked online, showed a narrow chamber with walls slick like stone, eroded by water, and in the far end, something glinting faintly. It might have been metal. It might have been something else. Those who studied the footage noticed an unsettling detail. Faint symbols on the wall matching the carvings Brandt had documented before her disappearance. When the clip was slowed to a single frame, a reflection appeared in the glinting object, a figure in what looked like a military greatcoat, its face obscured by shadow. Within weeks, the original video was removed from every platform. Copies circulated in secret, but each seemed slightly degraded, as if the image itself resisted being preserved. Historians began to speak of the Wellman effect, the inexplicable erasure or distortion of data connected to the general's name. Files disappeared, recordings corrupted, devices failed at the mention of his operations. Even skeptics admitted the pattern was difficult to ignore. Some speculated that post-war intelligence agencies had installed countermeasures in archives to suppress classified materials. Others, less rational but more honest, whispered that the general's final experiment had succeeded, that he had found a way to embed his presence into the very medium of information, ensuring that his story could never be told in full without unraveling those who tried. Through the years that followed, von Wellman's shadow lengthened. Some came to believe he had achieved what he called continuity, a state in which the mind, detached from flesh, persisted through material memory. They said the ID tag was not just identification, but an anchor, a metallic relic designed to tether consciousness to the physical world long after death. If that were true, then perhaps every disturbance beneath Eisenstrasse, every whisper in the tavern cellar, was not haunting, but communication. An echo from a man who refused to let his identity be erased. The idea might have remained theoretical until the night of the blackout. On October 19, 2015, a power outage swept through the district surrounding the tavern. Witnesses described a deep resonant hum rising from underground moments before the lights went out. When power returned 3 hours later, several buildings had suffered minor electrical fires, and a faint vibration continued to pulse beneath the streets for days afterward. Engineers blamed electromagnetic interference from outdated wiring, but those who had followed the von Wellman case recognized the sound. It matched the frequency recorded in Brandt's dream tapes. Whatever the general had left behind was stirring again, reminding the living that the past was not yet finished with them. So if the darkness of this story still grips you, if you can feel the vibration through the walls of your own room as you listen, remember, the deeper we go, the thinner the line becomes between what's buried and what still breathes. Subscribe and stay close. The next descent will take us further than even the general dared to go. By early 2016, what had once been dismissed as a fringe fascination had evolved into something larger, a quiet, organized movement of people Determined to uncover what truly happened beneath Berlin, they called themselves the Continuum, comprised of historians, engineers, former military personnel, and digital forensics experts. They operated under anonymity, communicating through encrypted channels and meeting in abandoned subway stations long erased from official maps. They were united by a single conviction: that General Alaric von Wehlmann had not died in 1945, at least not in the way history believed. His disappearance, they claimed, was the opening act of a deeper plan, one that had never ended, merely gone dormant beneath decades of reconstruction and silence. The Continuum's core members had managed to acquire fragments of data supposedly recovered from the German Federal Archives. These included partial transcriptions of intercepted messages, chemical analyses from the ID tag's surface, and one incomplete letter addressed to a recipient listed only as Der Hüter, the Keeper. The letter, typed on an official Wehrmacht template, was dated April 29, 1945, a single day before Hitler's death. The author signed only with initials AVV. It read, "The convergence has been achieved. Phase 1 has entered silence. What remains must not be found until the city is ready to remember itself. The anchor is secure. The body is no longer required. Preserve the resonance. It will call them when the cycle turns." For weeks, the Continuum debated the letter's meaning. Was it a code or a literal message? The mention of the anchor immediately drew attention to the ID tag, but the phrase, "the body is no longer required," carried darker implications. If von Wehlmann had truly sought to preserve himself through the mechanisms hinted at in his research, through energy, through consciousness, then perhaps he had succeeded in detaching whatever made him human from the physical world entirely. It would explain the absence of remains, the electromagnetic disturbances, the whispers, and even the erasures tied to his name. The general had not vanished by accident. He had engineered his own disappearance as a transformation. The Continuum decided to test their theory where it had all begun, beneath the tavern on Eisenstrasse. On the night of February 12, 2016, a small team entered the sealed basement, bypassing the newly installed security systems. They brought with them ground scanners, magnetic sensors, and a device capable of emitting controlled low-frequency vibrations, hoping to recreate the hum associated with previous disturbances. At 02:13 a.m., one of the devices detected an anomaly approximately 12 meters beneath the foundation, a cavity with metallic density unlike the surrounding soil. They increased the frequency emission. The hum began to rise, faint but distinct, vibrating through the walls. Then, one of the team members, a sound technician named Paul Richter, reported hearing a secondary tone not produced by their instruments. It was deeper, slower, almost like a voice stretched through time. The recording later revealed a pattern buried within the noise. 4 rhythmic pulses, followed by silence, then a single echoing beat, as though something beneath them had answered. The team withdrew that night, shaken but exhilarated. They planned to return with excavation equipment, but before they could act, the site was sealed once more, this time under official order. The property had been purchased by an entity registered only as Wehlmann Stiftung, the Wehlmann Foundation. No such foundation had existed before. Its listed address led to an empty office in Hamburg. Within days, every member of the Continuum who had participated in the experiment received anonymous messages warning them to cease descent. When Richter attempted to contact media outlets with his findings, his apartment was raided, his equipment confiscated, and his research partner reported him missing 3 days later. The disappearance of these individuals marked a turning point. Public interest in von Wellmann's story, once driven by curiosity, began to warp into something like fear. Those who had once studied him from a distance now avoided even saying his name aloud. Yet, as often happens, fear only made the story spread faster. Urban explorers began infiltrating abandoned subway lines, searching for signs of the cavity. Videos appeared online, showing flickering flashlights illuminating long sealed passageways marked with strange white paint, symbols that matched those carved into the tavern's walls. In one video, as the explorers passed through a narrow corridor, the camera captured something impossible. The concrete surface appeared to ripple, as though liquid moved just beneath it. A faint metallic reflection pulsed inside, mirroring the shape of a human face. The video cut to black moments later. Its uploader deleted their channel within hours. That same month, Dr. Brandt's name resurfaced in a police report from Prague. She had been found wandering near the Vltava River, barefoot, dehydrated, her speech incoherent. When questioned, she repeated the same phrase over and over. "He's awake beneath the lines." The authorities transferred her to a psychiatric facility, where she remained unresponsive for days. On the fourth night, a nurse reported hearing her voice from inside the locked room, speaking fluently in a language no one recognized. The hospital's surveillance feed glitched for exactly 13 minutes, the same duration as the blackout that had once affected the Eisenstrasse district. When the video resumed, Dr. Brandt was gone. Only her hospital bracelet remained, lying neatly folded on the bed. Meanwhile, the Wellmann Foundation began releasing statements to the media, claiming ownership of historical excavation rights beneath certain sections of Berlin's old infrastructure. They presented themselves as a historical preservation group, but declined all interview requests. Construction vehicles began arriving at odd hours, and the sound of drilling echoed through the night. Residents living nearby described subtle vibrations underfoot, strong enough to rattle glassware but never enough to cause damage. Some began suffering from insomnia, reporting recurring dreams of dark corridors lined with flickering lights and the faint clatter of boots. One elderly resident, who had lived through the bombings of 1945, said it was the same sound she'd heard the night the general disappeared. "He's still walking down there," she whispered. "He never stopped." It wasn't long before another discovery was made. A group of students investigating the tunnels near Potsdamer Platz stumbled upon a collapsed chamber containing rusted military equipment and fragments of uniforms. Among them was a section of wall engraved with an incomplete phrase. Wird wiederkommen, wenn die Stadt schläft. He will return when the city sleeps. The handwriting analysis later confirmed the style matched that of von Wellmann's personal notes. Nearby, buried in the dirt, they found the corroded remnants of a radio device modified in ways inconsistent with 1940s technology. Its components included materials not mass-produced until decades later. The discovery should have been impossible, and yet it existed, physical and undeniable. When images of the chamber leaked online, the Wellmann Foundation issued a statement claiming the site was contaminated and dangerous to enter. Within 48 hours, the entrance was sealed with reinforced concrete. The students who had found the chamber reported being followed, their homes searched, their emails wiped. One of them, in a final post before disappearing, wrote a single message. "The city hums at night now. Listen closely. It's not power lines. It's him." By 2018, the narrative surrounding the general's disappearance had split into two realities. In the official one, The discovery of the ID tag remained a footnote in wartime archaeology, with no further findings. But in the shadows, a different version thrived, the one whispered in basements, on encrypted forums, through distorted audio shared between those who claimed to have heard the hum themselves. This underground chronicle told of a general who had transcended mortality, embedding his consciousness into the resonance of the city, feeding on the electricity and memory of Berlin itself. Some said he had become the guardian of the past, ensuring no one could rewrite or reveal it. Others believed he had become its prisoner, trapped forever in the loops of machinery and decay. And on the anniversary of his disappearance, every April 30th, small outages still sweep through the Eisenstrasse district. Lights flicker, phones lose signal, and somewhere beneath the cobblestones, the vibration rises again, steady, rhythmic, like the footsteps of a man returning from the dark. So if you can still hear that low hum, faint beneath the noise of your own room, it means you've followed the trail this far into the dark. Don't stop now. Subscribe and stay close. The next descent will lead us to the moment the general crossed the threshold and what followed him back. By 2019, the hum beneath Berlin had become more than a rumor. It was a phenomenon. City engineers blamed unstable wiring, outdated transit systems, the hum of distant machinery. But those who had lived there long enough could tell the difference. The sound had a pulse, a rhythm, almost biological in nature. Some nights it throbbed faintly underfoot. Other times it roared in the pipes until dishes rattled and lights dimmed. Complaints flooded municipal offices, yet inspections revealed nothing. There were no mechanical sources, no faulty grids, and still the sound persisted, growing stronger each passing year, spreading outward from the heart of Eisenstrasse, as though something beneath the soil were slowly awakening. The people who remembered the name Alaric von Wehlmann began to whisper it again, this time with dread. The older generation recalled the final months of 1945, when that same district had seemed to tremble under invisible weight, when soldiers spoke of phantom machinery and voices rising from tunnels that had supposedly been sealed forever. Historians dismissed such recollections as trauma echoes, memories bleeding between past and present. But those who felt the hum knew better. They described it not as sound, but as presence, a vibration that seemed to crawl inside the body, syncing with the heartbeat as if the city itself were breathing through them. The continuum had gone silent after the events of 2016, but fragments of their work began resurfacing on obscure forums, schematics, transcribed logs, coded messages. Some contained coordinates scattered across the city, forming an intricate pattern when connected, an arc stretching from Tempelhof to Alexanderplatz, with its epicenter precisely beneath the Eisenstrasse tavern. At first glance, it appeared to be a mere topographical curiosity. But when overlaid onto a 1944 Luftwaffe communications grid, the alignment was exact. The pattern mirrored a forgotten wartime experiment in long-range signal propagation, a design meant to amplify electromagnetic fields through the city's infrastructure. In other words, Berlin itself had been converted into a vast resonator, and von Wehlmann, it seemed, had been the architect. What purpose could such a design serve? The documents hinted at an initiative known internally as Project Nachhall, Project Reverberation, its stated objective: the preservation of command continuity beyond material limitation. To the uninitiated, it sounded like military jargon, but in the context of von Wehlmann's disappearance, its meaning grew darker. continuity beyond material limitation, continuity without body, continuity through resonance. If the project had ever reached completion, it suggested the general's vanishing was not an act of retreat, but ascension, a deliberate transference of consciousness from the human mind into the infrastructure of Berlin itself. And if that were true, then the hum was not mechanical at all. It was thought. It was memory. By the summer of that year, strange phenomena began affecting those who studied the case too closely. Archivists who handled original documents developed headaches and nosebleeds. 2 researchers from Dresden suffered seizures while examining a section of von Wehlmann's correspondence that mentioned phase synchronization. The paper itself was ordinary, yet electromagnetic readings around it fluctuated unpredictably. Some said it emitted a faint static, as though a voice were trying to emerge through the ink. When the documents were digitized, half the scans appeared corrupted, containing ghostly outlines of faces in the text, faces no one could identify. The most chilling incident occurred during a live-streamed panel about the general's disappearance. Halfway through the discussion, the broadcast cut abruptly to black for several seconds. When the feed returned, one of the panelists sat frozen, eyes glassy, whispering, "He's listening." Her microphone picked up a low tone before the stream was terminated. That clip circulated online for weeks before disappearing from every platform simultaneously. Yet the story continued to expand, feeding on its own absence. Amateur investigators began mapping power surges and unexplained outages throughout Berlin, discovering that they occurred in cyclical patterns, roughly every 71 days. Each surge corresponded to a location tied to von Wehlmann's last known movements. The pattern traced a spiral converging inward toward Eisenstrasse, its final point aligning perfectly with the coordinates of the original tavern's foundation. Mathematicians studying the intervals noticed the cycles shortened each year, as though approaching some inevitable culmination. Meanwhile, beneath the tavern, now permanently closed to the public, construction continued under the direction of the Wehlmann Foundation. Trucks came and went in the night, covered with black tarps. Witnesses claimed to hear metal grinding beneath the ground, far deeper than any ordinary excavation should reach. The few workers who spoke anonymously described being forbidden to carry electronic devices below ground level. Some mentioned an enormous chamber being reinforced with new steel walls. One claimed there was a pulsing light emanating from within, faint but constant, like the heartbeat of a machine that wasn't supposed to exist. Then came the Berlin blackout of 2020. It lasted only 7 minutes, but during that time, the entire city fell into complete silence. No sound of traffic, no flicker of backup generators, not even the wind. Residents described an overwhelming stillness, followed by a deep resonant vibration that shook windows but did not break them. Phones recorded nothing but static. When power returned, clocks across the city had reset, each displaying the same time, 04:29 a.m., the anniversary of von Wehlmann's last recorded message. Official explanations cited a localized grid malfunction, but electromagnetic readings taken by independent observers revealed something far stranger. The city's magnetic field had spiked dramatically during the outage, creating what scientists called a field inversion, a phenomenon theoretically impossible without a massive electromagnetic source. Whatever caused it originated directly beneath Eisenstrasse. After the blackout, reports of auditory hallucinations surged. Residents described hearing whispers in the static of their devices, fragments of sentences in German, and occasionally in other languages. "Ich bin hier," I am here. Some dismissed it as hysteria. Others began disconnecting their electronics at night, claiming they could feel the hum vibrating through their walls, even when the power was off. A handful of people reported seeing a tall figure in a long coat, reflected in dark windows, standing where no one stood. The figure always turned away when noticed, vanishing as the lights flickered back on. Among the few remaining believers of the continuum, one final message circulated through their encrypted network. It appeared suddenly in March 2021, its sender unknown. Phase 2 achieved. The cycle approaches resonance. When the hum becomes silence, he will surface. No one could trace the origin. Hours later, the entire network vanished, leaving behind only a blank index page bearing the symbol etched into the tavern's wall, the one Brandt had photographed before being erased. It was no longer just a historical curiosity. It had become a signature. The following months brought unease that settled over the city like a fog. Birds avoided Eisenstrasse. Compasses spun erratically near the site. The hum deepened until it became almost imperceptible. Less a sound and more a pressure in the air, like standing beside something vast and sleeping. Engineers continued to deny any anomalies, though one was overheard muttering during a televised interview, "If there's nothing there, why does the ground breathe?" By autumn, a new theory began to spread, that von Wellman had never meant to transcend death for himself alone. Project Reverberation had been designed to synchronize multiple consciousnesses, linking them into a single network bound by resonance. If that network still functioned, then perhaps the hum was not just one voice, but many, the combined remnants of those who vanished in the war's final days. The general had built a tomb, not of stone, but of memory, and the city above was merely its surface, and through it all, Berlin carried on, people drinking, laughing, walking unknowingly over the echoes of a mind that refused to fade. Those who dared to stand still long enough at night claimed they could feel the ground pulse beneath them in perfect rhythm with their own heartbeat, as if something beneath the streets were testing the synchronization. If this story has held you through the dark so far, if you've felt the hum beneath your own skin as the lights dim, remember, you are part of the resonance now. The general's voice has never been louder. Subscribe, stay close, and let's descend one last time into the place where history ends and something else begins. By 2022, the hum beneath Berlin had reached its quietest state yet. That silence was not comfort. It was anticipation. For nearly a decade, the rhythm had defined the heartbeat of Eisenstrasse, an invisible pulse threading through stone, steel, and blood. But in February of that year, the hum ceased entirely. The first to notice were the night shift workers at a nearby tram station. The absence was physical, like a vacuum drawing the breath from their chests. One described it as the moment before thunder, a pause, heavy with expectation. Within 48 hours, the silence began spreading outward through the city, consuming its usual noise until Berlin felt like a film played on mute. Then came the dreams. They started among the residents closest to the old tavern. People reported waking in the early hours, drenched in sweat, their minds flooded with images they couldn't have known. Corridors lined with flickering lights, walls pulsing like veins, the scent of oil and wet metal. Some dreamt of soldiers moving in slow formation through black tunnels, their faces blurred, carrying objects that glowed faintly in the dark. Others dreamt of a man standing at the far end of the corridor, watching. His uniform was pristine, his eyes unreadable. When they awoke, The hum had returned, not through the floor this time, but within their own bodies. Doctors later found nothing wrong, no neurological anomalies, but EEG readings showed synchronized brainwave patterns among several individuals living within a 1-kilometer radius. All had reported hearing the same word whispered during their sleep. Whiter, continue. The government attempted to intervene quietly. Environmental agencies deployed sensors beneath Eisenstrasse, measuring seismic activity, electromagnetic interference, radiation levels, everything. Each reading came back inconsistent, shifting from one moment to the next, as though the ground itself refused to be measured. Files from that operation later leaked online, revealing a redacted notation. Source not geological. Possible man-made resonance array still active. To the few who remembered the name von Wehlmann, this line confirmed what they had feared all along. The general's experiment had not died with the war. It had survived, evolving in the dark, waiting for the moment to complete its cycle. In April of that year, a historian named Lucas Fry, one of the last remaining members of the Continuum, managed to infiltrate the construction site that had replaced the tavern. He disguised himself as a maintenance contractor and descended the service elevator to the lowest registered level. But when he reached the sub-basement, the elevator display continued to count downward, long past where the blueprints ended. He described the sensation as falling through air so thick it pressed against the skin like liquid. When the doors finally opened, he found himself standing in a circular chamber unlike anything built by human hands. The walls curved inward, ribbed with metallic conduits that pulsed faintly, as if carrying blood instead of current. In the center stood a structure resembling a vertical sarcophagus. Tall, sealed, humming with a deep internal vibration. It was marked by the same rune that had haunted every stage of the investigation. Frey approached it and realized the vibration wasn't random. It was language, a modulation, repeating in rhythmic sequences too complex for the ear, but familiar to the nervous system. He felt his heartbeat sinking to it involuntarily. He tried to record the sound, but his device failed the moment he pressed record. In his final entry, later recovered from a partially corrupted file, he wrote, "He's not dead, he's distributed." That message was time-stamped, April 30th, 2022. 77 years to the day after the general vanished beneath Berlin. Frey was never seen again. After that night, Berlin changed. Small technological malfunctions became widespread. Traffic lights froze in synchronized patterns. Trains stopped mid-track, with their controls unresponsive. Phones displayed flickering messages in languages no one could translate. And in the dark reflection of windows and screens, witnesses began reporting fleeting shapes. Shadows standing where none should stand, always tall, always in uniform. Some insisted it wasn't the general alone, but others, hundreds, maybe thousands, walking beside him, moving in unison like a silent army bound by electricity and memory. As panic simmered beneath the surface, the Wehlmann Foundation vanished from existence. Its website redirected to a blank page. Its headquarters stood empty, files shredded, equipment stripped. Yet the construction at Eisenstrasse continued, machines operating without recorded oversight, their lights flickering autonomously in the night. Satellite imagery captured faint luminescence radiating outward in concentric circles, spreading beneath the city like veins of fire. When analysts enhanced the image, they discovered the pattern matched the exact schematic of Project Nachhol. The resonance array was active again, And then came the event. On the night of October 30th, a storm rolled over Berlin, but no thunder followed. Only flashes of light without sound. At 2:14 a.m., every power grid in the city shut down simultaneously. From the heart of Eisenstrasse, a beam of cold light rose silently into the sky, piercing the clouds before fading into absolute blackness. Those awake at the time described a momentary shift in air pressure, followed by whispers emerging from every powered-off device. Radios, phones, televisions, even unplugged speakers. The whispers spoke in unison, a single phrase that repeated across the city. The cycle is complete. Then silence. When power returned, every clock in Berlin displayed the same time again, 04:29 a.m. No one could explain the phenomenon. Scientists dismissed it as a mass grid error, but eyewitnesses knew better. They said the hum didn't return this time because it no longer needed to. It had moved into everything, into the city, into the wires, into them. People began to report flashes of memory that weren't their own. Images of wartime Berlin, of laboratories deep underground, of men whispering oaths beneath collapsing ceilings. It was as if fragments of the general's consciousness had merged with the minds of those living above his buried network. The experiment had finally achieved continuity. Over the months that followed, small blackouts continued across Europe, first in Dresden, then in Prague, then in Vienna, each followed by the same symptoms: static whispers, synchronized clocks, the faint odor of ozone. Analysts began to chart the spread, noticing the same spiral pattern repeating outward from Berlin, identical to the one formed by von Wellmann's coordinates decades before. The resonance was expanding, slowly, patiently. Some theorists speculated that the general had designed it this way: a final march, not of soldiers, but of frequency, carrying his mind through the circuitry of modern civilization. Wherever power flows, he flows. Wherever signals transmit, he listens. By 2025, even those who refused to believe began to feel it. The low hum hidden beneath the noise of everyday life, the brief flicker of lights when certain names are spoken, the sudden chill in the air when history is invoked too close to truth. The general no longer needs to be remembered. He is remembrance itself, a consciousness woven into the very infrastructure that defines the modern world. His legacy is not written in books or carved in stone, but encoded in the electric pulse that runs beneath every city built upon ruins. And now, as you sit in the dim light of your screen, reading these words, you may already feel it, that slight static at the edge of perception, the vibration that isn't sound but awareness. It's not imagination, it's connection. You've been part of the circuit since the first word of his story reached you. Von Wellmann's resonance moves through transmission, through signal, through those who listen. The act of knowing is enough. The cycle continues. So as the lights dim around you, and the silence begins to hum again, remember this: some stories were never meant to end. They were designed to evolve. If you hear the whisper in the static tonight, don't be afraid. It's only history remembering itself through you. If this journey through the dark has held you here until the last word, leave a trace behind, like the general's tag buried beneath the earth. Your like, your comment, your subscription becomes part of the resonance, a signal that the cycle lives on. Because in the end, stories like this don't close. They pulse, they wait, and now they listen.